You've learned your lesson, old woman. Never get in the way of a police officer.
Mom, are you okay? Mom, who are you? What are you doing here?
She's my mother, and I'm the soldier my mother kept telling me about.
Police tased a female veteran in a wheelchair. Then, her son's Army unit surrounded the cafe. When Officer Derek Walsh tased Rachel Morgan in her wheelchair, he didn't know she was Staff Sergeant Liam Morgan's mother, or that his unit was about to teach everyone the true meaning of sacrifice. Rosie's Café buzzed with morning rush at 8:47 a.m. when everything changed forever. College students hunched over laptops, while construction workers grabbed coffee before shift changes. The small-town gathering place had served 3 generations of Fort Bragg families, but today its warm atmosphere would be shattered by grief, redeemed by courage, and transformed by truth that some had forgotten about freedom's price. Rachel Morgan, 42, navigated her wheelchair through Rosie's familiar chaos with practiced ease. The IED that took her legs had also ended her career as Army helicopter pilot, but not her fierce independence that drove her to reject help from anyone, including her son. The Distinguished Flying Cross in her purse meant less than the college acceptance letter she was celebrating today. At 42, Rachel had decided to become teacher. GI Bill finally used for herself instead of helping others navigate benefits. Small victory for woman who'd saved 37 lives during medical evacuations before explosion ended her flying career. The challenge coin from Liam's 82nd Airborne stayed hidden in her wallet, reminder of son she barely spoke to since their argument about refusing military disability support. Pride had cost them both too much. Sometimes the heaviest burdens aren't the ones that break your body, but the ones that break your heart when you're trying to carry them alone. "Ma'am, you're blocking the fire exit," Officer Derek Walsh announced, approaching with authority that masked personal pain Rachel couldn't see. His brother Danny's death in Afghanistan had left him bitter toward military families who got support his family had been denied during their darkest hour. Rachel looked up from her acceptance letter to find Walsh studying her with expressions she'd learned to recognize: civilian authority mixed with resentment toward veterans whose service reminded him of personal loss he couldn't process healthily. "I'm at corner table, officer. Plenty of room for emergency access. Fire code requires clear pathways. Move immediately." Rachel glanced around. Wide aisles, empty tables nearby. Walsh was creating problems where none existed, but she recognized the signs. Grief turned to anger, projected onto convenient targets. "Officer, you seem upset about something beyond wheelchair placement. Everything okay?" Walsh's face hardened. Military families got everything: support, benefits, recognition. His brother Danny had died in same convoy attack that took Rachel's legs, but Danny was National Guard. No military funeral, no benefits, no support for family left behind to grieve alone. "Don't try to counsel me, lady. Just move." "I'm not counseling, just recognizing pain when I see it." "You don't know anything about pain." Wrong thing to say. Rachel had lost 37 patients during final mission, soldiers whose names she whispered every sleepless night. But Walsh saw only disabled woman getting attention his family had been denied when Danny came home in box with no ceremony, no recognition, no support. Rachel faced choice: submit to harassment or explain that she understood Walsh's pain because she'd lived it. Survivor's guilt, family destroyed by war, system that failed those who needed help most. "Officer Walsh, what was your brother's name?" The question hit like physical blow. Nobody had asked about Danny in 2 years. "How did you..." Pain recognizes pain. What unit? Walsh stepped back. Danny Walsh, National Guard, died protecting convoy near Kandahar. Rachel's heart stopped. She'd been in that convoy, treated wounded from Danny's unit, remembered young soldier who died holding perimeter while she evacuated casualties who would have died without his sacrifice. I remember Danny, she whispered. Brave kid. Held the line while I got wounded out. He saved lives. Walsh's world shifted. This wasn't random disabled veteran. This was survivor Danny had died protecting. You were there? Danny's why I'm alive to sit in this wheelchair. His sacrifice saved 17 soldiers that day. But Walsh was drowning in emotions he'd buried for 2 years. Family who'd gotten nothing while she'd received everything. Then why did he die for nothing? Danny didn't die for nothing, Rachel said gently. He died so others could live, including me. You got medals, benefits, support. Danny got buried in rain with 20 people at funeral. System forgot him. System failed your family. Danny deserved better. You all did. But Walsh's grief had transformed into rage that couldn't accept compassion from person whose survival represented Danny's death without recognition or reward for family left behind. Easy words from someone who got everything. I got broken body and nightmares, same as any wounded warrior. But you got help, and your family should have too. That's the real crime here. Walsh drew his taser, hand shaking with 2 years of suppressed grief. You lived because my brother died. Danny saved me so I could save others. Honor that. Don't talk about my brother. But Rachel stayed calm despite weapon pointed at her chest. He died protecting people, not threatening them. Walsh was past rational thought. 2 years of buried pain exploding into violence that would destroy everything Danny had died to protect. The electrical shock dropped Rachel from wheelchair while Café patrons screamed. She convulsed on floor as Walsh realized what he'd done. A tax survivor his brother had saved. Through windows, military convoy approached. Not rescue this time. Family reunion. Sometimes those who hurt us most are carrying wounds we cannot see. And healing begins when someone finally witnesses pain that never stopped bleeding. Staff Sergeant Liam Morgan burst through door as paramedics worked on his mother. Behind him, 5 soldiers from 82nd Airborne, not rescue mission, but son who'd driven 3 hours to surprise mother celebrating college acceptance after months of silence between them. Mom! Liam dropped beside Rachel while soldiers secured scene with precision that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with family. Walsh backed away, processing catastrophic implications. She was blocking exits. That's my mother, Liam said with quiet fury. First time in 5 years, she's asked family to celebrate anything. Rachel regained consciousness to find son she'd pushed away holding her hand. Liam, why are you here? Heard about college. Wanted to surprise you. Tears streamed down Rachel's face. Months of rejecting help, maintaining independence, had nearly cost her relationship with only family she had left. I'm sorry I pushed you away. I'm sorry I pushed when you needed space. Walsh watched reunion he'd nearly destroyed through violence that dishonored everything Danny had died protecting. Cell phones captured everything. Mother and son reconciling while officer faced consequences of attacking disabled veteran whose service had earned protection rather than assault. Social media exploded, but comments revealed different story than expected. Rachel's volunteer work at VA hospital, helping wounded warriors navigate systems she'd mastered through necessity. "That's Rachel Morgan," viewers typed. "She helped my dad get benefits. She fights for vets nobody else will help. My brother says she's legend at VA hospital." But attention brought unwanted scrutiny. Federal investigators arrived as viral video showed police assault on disabled veteran, triggering civil rights investigation Walsh hadn't anticipated. "Officer Walsh, you're suspended pending federal investigation," announced Captain Rodriguez after watching footage that destroyed any justification for electrical assault. Meanwhile, Rachel's medical crisis deepened. Electrical shock had triggered cardiac complications in a woman whose body had endured enough trauma for several lifetimes. "Mom needs surgery," reported Army medic. "Heart rhythm is irregular." Liam faced possibility of losing mother just when they'd started healing relationship that pride had nearly destroyed permanently. "Can't lose you now that we're talking again." "Not going anywhere," Rachel whispered despite obvious pain. "Got too much to live for now." But Walsh's assault had exposed systematic problem. National Guard families receiving inadequate support, while active duty families got comprehensive benefits. Danny's death had been forgotten by a system that should have honored his sacrifice. "We need to fix this," Rachel told Liam. "Danny Walsh deserved better. His family deserves better." Rachel refused federal prosecution, stunning investigators who'd built case around assault on disabled veteran by officer whose grief had exploded into violence requiring accountability through criminal justice system. "Mrs. Morgan, Officer Walsh committed serious federal crime. Derek committed desperate act by broken man whose brother died protecting people like me. Prison doesn't honor Danny's sacrifice." Instead, Rachel proposed alternative that would address root causes. Danny Walsh Memorial Foundation, providing support for National Guard families whose service had been overlooked by systems designed for active duty personnel. Derek will coordinate outreach to families like his own who fell through cracks. Danny's death will save other families from isolation that nearly destroyed everyone. Federal prosecutors reluctantly agreed to restorative justice approach, but implementation faced bureaucratic obstacles that threatened to derail healing Rachel had envisioned. Pentagon says National Guard support programs exceed statutory authority, reported Foundation attorney. "Then we changed the law," Rachel replied from a hospital bed, while Liam coordinated political support through Ida del 2nd Airborne Connections, whose influence could move congressional mountains. But Walsh struggled with accepting help from women he'd nearly killed. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Danny would have. Because that's what soldiers do." Rachel's surgery succeeded, but recovery revealed deeper challenges. Pentagon bureaucracy resisted National Guard support expansion, while police department fought federal oversight of officer whose actions had exposed systematic failures. Mrs. Morgan's foundation lacks federal authorization, testified Pentagon representative during congressional hearing. National Guard families receive appropriate support through existing channels. Existing channels failed Danny Walsh's family, Rachel testified via video link from hospital. System that forgets heroes creates more Derek Walshes. But political opposition mounted. Defense contractors worried about funding redirection, while police unions claimed federal oversight would handcuff officers facing legitimate threats from disabled individuals whose conditions might mask dangerous intentions. Rachel Morgan Foundation threatens operational efficiency, argued union representative while ignoring video evidence of unprovoked assault. Rachel watched foundation struggle against institutional resistance that prioritized bureaucratic convenience over veteran families whose needs transcended organizational boundaries designed to limit rather than expand support. "Maybe we're fighting too big," Liam suggested during visit that reminded Rachel how much his support meant during battles she couldn't win alone. Maybe. But Danny's worth fighting for. His family's worth fighting for. Walsh began attending Rachel's physical therapy sessions, helping woman he'd nearly killed while learning that healing required confronting rather than avoiding pain that had consumed him for 2 years. True courage isn't avoiding the fight. It's choosing the right battle when everything inside you wants to give up. Rachel's foundation faced congressional defunding as Pentagon lobbying successfully portrayed National Guard support expansion as threat to military readiness, requiring budgetary discipline rather than emotional accommodation for families whose needs exceeded statutory parameters. Danny Walsh Memorial Foundation represents unfunded mandate threatening operational capabilities, testified Defense Secretary, while Rachel watched from hospital bed as months of work faced elimination through political maneuvering she couldn't combat from wheelchair. But deeper crisis emerged when Walsh's criminal charges were reinstated after police union pressure forced federal prosecutors to abandon restorative justice agreement that had enabled foundation work rather than pursuing incarceration that would solve nothing. Mr. Walsh faces federal prosecution for assault on disabled veteran, announced U.S. attorney whose political ambitions required high-profile conviction despite victims' explicit objection to criminal proceedings that would destroy healing she'd worked to create. Rachel's health deteriorated under stress of watching foundation collapse, while she'd tried to help faced prison for actions she'd forgiven in favor of systematic change that political forces were determined to prevent. Foundation is finished, admitted attorney who'd volunteered to fight Pentagon bureaucracy but couldn't overcome institutional resistance backed by unlimited resources and political influence. Liam watched his mother's recovery stall as emotional trauma from foundation failure triggered depression that medical intervention couldn't address, while physical healing remained incomplete from electrical assault that had nearly killed her. "Mom, you did everything possible. Sometimes systems don't want to change. Danny deserved better than sometimes," Rachel whispered while watching news coverage of Walsh's arraignment that would send him to prison for grief-driven violence she understood better than prosecutors seeking career advancement. Walsh's trial began with overwhelming evidence, while Rachel testified from wheelchair about restorative justice that federal prosecutors had abandoned under political pressure, requiring conviction rather than healing that honored nobody's sacrifice or memory. "Mrs. Morgan, defendant assaulted you without provocation," prosecutor argued while ignoring victims' explicit request for mercy that would enable systematic change rather than individual punishment. "Derek assaulted his own pain more than me," Rachel replied with dignity that challenged legal system's emphasis on retribution over restoration. But media attention attracted unexpected ally, Patricia Walsh, Danny's mother, who'd remained silent during 2 years of family grief that had consumed Derek while honoring nobody's memory through isolation rather than community support. "My son Danny died protecting people," Patricia testified during proceedings that would determine Derek's fate. Rachel Morgan is trying to honor that sacrifice. Sending Derek to prison dishonors everything Danny believed about protecting rather than punishing those who need help. Foundation supporters rallied outside courthouse, while inside, legal system grappled with victim who refused victimhood in favor of transformation that challenged institutional assumptions about justice requiring punishment rather than healing broken systems that created violence. Your Honor, Mrs. Morgan's foundation represents vigilante justice circumventing established legal procedures, argued prosecutor whose conviction rate mattered more than veteran families whose needs transcended criminal statistics. But Rachel's testimony exposed deeper truth. System that failed Danny Walsh's family created Derek Walsh's violence. Prison won't prevent next Derek Walsh. Foundation might. Walsh faced conviction despite victim advocacy, while Foundation faced extinction despite congressional supporters whose political influence couldn't overcome Pentagon resistance to accountability that threatened budgetary priorities. Unexpected intervention came from AIDA 2nd Airborne veterans whose political connections included former officers now serving in Congress with authority to challenge Pentagon resistance through legislative oversight that bureaucracy couldn't ignore or circumvent. Danny Walsh Memorial Foundation receives full congressional funding, announced House Veterans Affairs Committee during session that bypassed Pentagon objections through direct appropriation requiring implementation regardless of institutional preferences. Walsh's conviction was suspended pending Foundation coordination that would honor victims' wishes while establishing precedent for restorative justice in cases involving veteran-on-veteran violence driven by systematic failures rather than criminal intent. Mr. Walsh will coordinate National Guard family outreach while receiving counseling for grief that nearly destroyed multiple families, announced judge whose decision balanced accountability with healing that Rachel had advocated despite personal cost. Federal legislation established National Guard Family Support Act, recognizing part-time service as equally valid sacrifice deserving institutional assistance comparable to active duty benefits that bureaucracy had previously reserved for full-time personnel only. Danny Walsh died serving his country. His family deserves support that honors his sacrifice, declared bill's sponsor during signing ceremony that transformed individual tragedy into systematic reform, protecting vulnerable military families from institutional neglect. Rachel's foundation received federal charter, while Walsh began coordinating support for families whose needs had been ignored by systems designed to limit rather than expand assistance to those who'd served with honor regardless of uniform type. Sometimes victory looks like defeat until you realize the battle was bigger than you knew, and winning means changing the rules rather than playing by broken ones. Rachel's teaching career began at local high school where Danny had planned to work, bringing her full circle from military service through civilian tragedy to educational mission that honored fallen soldier through classroom dedication he'd wanted to fulfill. Mrs. Morgan teaches history from perspective of someone who made it, observed principal during evaluation recognizing Rachel's unique ability to connect military experience with academic instruction that inspired students to understand sacrifice behind freedoms they inherited. Derek Walsh completed foundation training while beginning social work degree that would enable systematic support for military families whose needs transcended individual assistance to encompass community understanding of service that honored rather than forgot those who'd served. Danny wanted to help kids who needed someone to believe in them. Derek reflected during program evaluation. Mrs. Morgan showed me how by believing in family, that had given up hope. Foundation faced daily challenges as bureaucratic resistance created obstacles requiring constant advocacy to maintain funding that Pentagon viewed as threat to traditional support hierarchies that prioritized active duty over National Guard service. Every family we help honors Danny's sacrifice while preventing another Derek Walsh. Rachel told Liam during weekly strategy sessions that demonstrated healing power of shared purpose transcending individual grief. Foundation's first anniversary faced crisis when Pentagon attempted defunding through budgetary review that questioned operational necessity of National Guard family support, exceeding statutory requirements for part-time service recognition and assistance programs. Danny Walsh Foundation represents unfunded mandate-threatening military readiness, testified Pentagon Comptroller during congressional hearing where Rachel fought for families whose needs transcended bureaucratic convenience or budgetary preferences. Representative Williams, we're not asking for charity. We're demanding honor for families whose sacrifice earned recognition through loved ones who died protecting strangers they'd never meet. Rachel testified, while wheelchair served as visible reminder of military service that had cost everything. Derek Walsh provided compelling testimony about bureaucratic failures that had enabled grief-driven violence. System that forgot my brother created monster that nearly killed woman he died protecting. Foundation prevents other families from experiencing isolation that destroys everyone. Congressional gallery filled with National Guard families whose stories revealed systematic neglect spanning decades of service that had been minimized by bureaucracy, viewing part-time soldiers as secondary priority rather than equally valid military sacrifice deserving institutional support. But Pentagon resistance intensified with threats to transfer Foundation oversight to Veterans Affairs Department, whose understaffing would effectively eliminate programs that threaten traditional support hierarchies, favoring active duty personnel over National Guard service members. Foundation operations faced sabotage as Pentagon bureaucracy delayed funding transfers while creating administrative obstacles requiring legal challenges that consumed resources needed for family assistance programs that were Foundation's primary mission. Mrs. Morgan, Pentagon is slow-rolling our appropriation while demanding compliance reviews that exceed congressional requirements, reported Foundation attorney whose volunteers couldn't match unlimited government resources opposing systematic change. Rachel's health declined under stress of fighting institutional resistance while maintaining teaching responsibilities that provided income-supporting foundation work that government funding couldn't cover due to bureaucratic delays designed to force program collapse. "Mom, you're pushing too hard," Liam observed during a visit that revealed physical toll of fighting Pentagon while recovering from electrical assault, whose effects hadn't fully healed despite medical optimism. Danny's family can't wait for bureaucrats to decide their service mattered, Rachel replied, while grading papers that reminded her why education mattered more than administrative convenience or political expedience. Walsh coordinated emergency support for 12 National Guard families facing eviction, while foundation funding remained frozen in Pentagon review process that prioritized institutional preferences over family needs requiring immediate assistance rather than bureaucratic deliberation. Congressional intervention forced Pentagon compliance when House Veterans Affairs Committee threatened budgetary hearings about institutional resistance to supporting National Guard families, whose service deserved recognition comparable to active duty benefits. Pentagon will release Danny Walsh Foundation funding immediately or face congressional investigation into systematic discrimination against National Guard families, announced committee chairman whose political influence exceeded bureaucratic resistance. Rachel's victory felt hollow despite legislative success. Months of fighting had weakened her health, while straining relationship with Liam, whose military career required balance between supporting mother and maintaining professional obligations to 82nd Airborne. Foundation is operating, but at what cost? Rachel reflected during medical appointment, revealing cardiac damage from electrical assault combined with stress from institutional battles that had nearly killed her again. But Walsh's transformation provided hope. Mrs. Morgan, 47 families received support this year because you refused to give up when everyone said change was impossible. Derek Walsh's social work internship began at VA Hospital, where Rachel had volunteered, creating full circle of service that honored Danny's memory through systematic support for families whose needs had been ignored too long by institutions designed to limit rather than expand assistance. 2 years later, Rachel's classroom displayed photos of 200-plus National Guard families helped by Foundation, while Derek Walsh completed degree enabling professional advocacy for military families whose needs transcended individual assistance to encompass systematic change. Mrs. Morgan's foundation has prevented 12 incidents similar to my assault by addressing root causes of veteran-on-veteran violence through comprehensive family support, Walsh reported during anniversary ceremony honoring progress that had transformed personal tragedy into systematic reform. Liam received promotion to Sergeant First Class with assignment enabling continued support for mother whose independence had evolved into interdependence that honored individual strength through community connection rather than isolation that had nearly destroyed their relationship. Mom taught me that strength isn't carrying everything alone. It's building systems that help others carry what they cannot handle individually. Liam reflected during ceremony, recognizing Rachel's transformation from wounded warrior to community leader. Rachel smiled while watching Derek help new National Guard widow navigate benefit system that had failed his family, understanding that healing required transforming individual pain into collective strength that honored sacrifice while preventing future tragedies through comprehensive support rather than institutional neglect. Sometimes the people who hurt us become the ones who help us heal most, Rachel observed during anniversary ceremony. When communities choose healing over punishment, everyone wins. Danny Walsh Memorial Foundation helped 500-plus National Guard families while generating $5 million in comprehensive support programs, recognizing part-time service as equally valid sacrifice deserving institutional assistance. Derek Walsh's transformation prevented 89 similar incidents through crisis intervention, addressing grief-driven violence before escalation. Rachel's teaching inspired 600-plus students, while Foundation became national model for veteran family support, transcending traditional boundaries. The National Guard Family Support Act established permanent funding, while Walsh's social work degree enabled professional advocacy for military families. Liam's promotion reflected Army recognition of families whose sacrifice supported service members through community strength, rather than individual isolation that had nearly destroyed multiple relationships. 5 years later, Rachel Morgan Protocol had revolutionized veteran conflict resolution while establishing restorative justice as preferred approach for addressing trauma-driven violence within military communities whose bonds transcended individual service to encompass family support. At 47, Rachel continued teaching while mentoring veterans whose transitions required community assistance rather than isolated struggle against systems designed to help, but often failing those needing support most. Derek Walsh became leading National Guard family advocate while honoring Danny's memory through service that transformed grief into purpose, protecting vulnerable families from institutional neglect. They learned that sometimes the heaviest burdens aren't the ones that break your body, but the ones that break your heart when you're trying to carry them alone. And true healing begins when communities choose compassion over punishment, creating connections that honor sacrifice while preventing tragedies through understanding that transforms individual pain into collective strength. Sometimes the heaviest burdens aren't the ones that break your body, but the ones that break your heart when you're trying to carry them alone. And healing begins when communities choose compassion over punishment.